So you never had a way out of here, did you?
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to episode 248 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday afternoon here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The 20th entry in our ongoing series, Guilty Pleasure Movies. And yet again, a man who has taken part in several guilty pleasure movies on this channel to this point has got another one in store for us today. That would be Sylvester Stallone and the 1996 beyond preposterous, beyond cheeseball, but oh so entertaining actioner, Daylight. Great name for a movie and kind of apropos. Was it a song by Coldplay? Yes, but that came out after the movie. Now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of history because the fall of 1996, this movie was released in time for the kind of winter season, the winter season box office crush. And it also was kind of jostling with Oscar bait type of films, which also come out towards the end of the year. But I can tell you, the fall of 1996 was my last semester at New York University. It was the end of my days, not to intentionally paraphrase an Arnold Schwarzenegger film from later in the 90s, end of days, but it was the end of my scholastic career. My final semester, coursework, and graduation the following spring. And there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in my life at that time. 1996 may have been the most action-packed, in good, bad, and ugly ways, year of my life. The fall of 1996 was when I was playing blackjack professionally pretty much full time. On top of going to school, on top of working 2 or 3 days a week at my dad's accounting firm, I was a busy little beaver. I was already a huge Sylvester Stallone fan and had seen in theaters Cliffhanger, Demolition Man. Didn't see The Specialist in theaters, but I saw Assassins the day it opened. Didn't suffer through Judge Dredd. And Daylight had been a pretty big spec screenplay that sold for close to $1 million a number of years earlier. And I was looking forward to seeing it. Any Stallone movie, any Stallone actioner, I would be, kind of down for. But the film came out and it did really well overseas, but it kind of laid an egg here in the States. And it followed a pattern of Stallone in the 90s where he had certain movies that were expected to do better than they did, just didn't really get there. Oh, the other guilty pleasure movies. So this is the 20th entry in this series, the Stallone guilty pleasure movies. Cobra, Over the Top, Tango and Cash. So we have 20, now 20% Sly. It's strange how memory works. I have such vivid thoughts of seeing the poster for the movie Daylight for what appeared to be months in every subway, on every Long Island Railroad platform, near every bus stop. And I'll give you another movie that you've probably never heard of that was the city was inundated with ads because it was Oscar bait. And it was an idea, long shot though it may be, that it was a version of a play, the movie adaptation of a play called I'm Not Rappaport. And the movie starred Walter Matthau and Ossie Davis. And whatever studio was behind it, I don't remember, they gave this film an enormous push in the hope that one or the other of those guys was going to somehow draw an Oscar nomination. Now, I'm Not Rappaport barely played in theaters. It certainly didn't play on Long Island. It probably a couple of theaters in the city. It made zero ripple, nothing. No Oscar nominations, and most critics didn't like it. Daylight came out, didn't do that well. And yeah, I'm sorry to say that I didn't go to see it, but this was another thing that put me off seeing the movie, is the fact that Stallone, without coming out and saying this movie sucks, or Judge Dredd also sucked, or Assassins should have been better, or The Specialist is complete trash. Probably have to do an episode on that one too. That's a real guilty pleasure movie for you, The Specialist. James Woods alone, it's worth the price of admission. He just chews scenery beyond imagination. He's William Shatner level in that film. Like every line of dialogue, I'm gonna close your heart in my hand. Stallone had just wrapped filming on Copland, a movie that was very difficult. The production itself was fine, but it was difficult for him because that's the movie where he stopped working out, put on a ton of weight, and looked like a normal 50-ish year old person instead of the 180-pound shredded Abercrombie and Fitch Sylvester Stallone. But the only reason why Stallone went to make Copland, why he kind of wanted to go back to his roots and get back to serious acting and not, as he famously said, not just a piece in an erector set. And at some point, so Daylight is set in New York City. Okay? It's set in New York City. And the reason why it's called Daylight, this is not a spoiler, it's supposed to be the Holland Tunnel. And there's a terrible accident inside the Holland Tunnel, and a bunch of people are trapped inside of the tunnel. And it's up to the former head of the EMS, kind of got screwed out of his job. He's an underdog. It's a Rocky Balboa story. It's the Rambo. It's the same kind of thing. But there's a lot of great location work that was done in the city. But once they're in the tunnel, that was not shot in the city. That was shot in Italy. And at a certain point during filming of Daylight, Stallone had kind of a come to Jesus moment, and he realized he didn't want to do this anymore. He was ready for phase 3 of his already incredible career. You know, phase 1 ran all the way up to like Tango and Cash, Lock Up, movies like that. And then he tried to reinvent himself as a comedian. It didn't work. Didn't work. Oscar was okay. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. I can't believe that Sly did that movie. How did he not know I was fucking with him? Arnold Schwarzenegger. He reinvented himself again. Cliffhanger, Demolition Man, The Specialist, Assassins, Judge Dredd, Daylight. But he was already tired of phase 3. And he wanted to go to phase 4, which would have been like phase 1, where he wanted to get back to serious acting. So that's why he signed to do Copland. Low budget. Everyone was going to work for scale. He got some of his buddies. He got Bobby D and Ray Liotta and Harvey Keitel. De Niro's barely in that movie, but my single favorite moment, Robert De Niro's entire career, go to lunch. Hey, go to lunch. Go to lunch. Case is over. Everybody get the fuck out of here. Get out of here. The case is fucking closed. Just absolutely epic. Iconic, epic, incredible scene. But Stallone wouldn't have said the things that he said before Daylight came out if he believed in the film, and that is why I didn't go to see it. That and the fact that it did get trashed by critics. Not all critics. There were some that appreciated the way that the story, they tried to layer it and give more to Stallone's character than we expected, and the effects work is top-notch. A lot of mechanical effects, a lot of on-set special effects. Nothing was done in a computer. There's no green screen. There's some really cool effects and stunt work in this film. But you just knew it wasn't going to be good. Because if the star of the movie is talking about what amounts to existential crises, the film's probably a piece of shit. So I didn't see it until it landed on video. And I rented it. I don't know if I got it at a Blockbuster, but I rented it and I know what it was. It was on pay-per-view, and I'm ashamed to say that sometime in the spring of 1997, I guess it was, I shelled out the $3 and I got it on pay-per-view and I taped it. And I was very pleasantly surprised that, you know what, I think the critics were overly harsh, and I think Stallone himself was overly harsh. There's nothing wrong with this movie. It's certainly better than Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. It's a better movie than The Specialist. It's not as good as Assassins. Assassins it's not perfect, but it does a lot of things right and has a lot of really memorable sequences. And Antonio Banderas just completely bonkers. He's so over the top, no pun intended, and so absurd in Assassins, it adds to the entertainment value, the cheese, the kitsch factor, the guilty pleasure factor. You cannot kill a woman a certain way. You must pull the trigger differently. Banderas, just golden. The dialogue is out of this world. The basic story of Daylight is it's an overcoming obstacles story. It's a disparate characters, people who would never meet each other in real life, having to come together and get through some kind of a crisis. So in a sense, it is an Irwin Allen 70s disaster film like The Poseidon Adventure, like The Towering Inferno, or if you want to go the same year, 1996, earlier in the year, Independence Day, same thing. Only instead of fighting aliens or being trapped in a 140-story office building or a cruise ship, they're stuck in the Holland Tunnel. And how are we going to get out of here? And you have some really interesting actors in smaller roles, such as Viggo Mortensen, who, spoiler alert, he doesn't last that long. I wish they had made the movie about that guy. He plays a mountain climber, multi-millionaire, comes from enormous wealth, but he's a survivalist. Now, if I'm making a movie about people stuck in a situation, how are they going to survive? I'm not going to kill the survivalist first. Why would you do that? Let's go back and remake the movie 127 Hours with James Franco. But instead of having that guy figure out how to survive, let's bump him off and we'll have somebody like me who has no survival skills. We'll have him survive. Well, that doesn't really make any sense. This is a guilty pleasure movie. They took the most interesting character and they bumped him off 30 minutes in. Brilliant. Great idea. I can't really explain why I really like this movie. Oh, Amy Brenneman was on her way up. She's terrific. She's really funny. Her character, she's like a writer at the end of her tether, and she's just coming out of a bad relationship, and she does a variation of New York, New York as Sinatra sings, and she completely butchers it, but she does it in such a funny way, it makes you like her character immediately. Daylight ended up, because of its overseas turn, it ended up making a profit. It would be difficult to call it an actual box office hit. It grossed just above 2 times its production cost. And in the States, it seemed to bomb. But as the late, great New York University Film School cinema studies professor and author and award-winning Los Angeles Times screenwriter, Los Angeles Times columnist, Robert Sklar, before this movie came out, in the spring of 1995, his unbelievable quote, "In Europe, they line up around the block for Stallone." He never called him Stallone, Sylvester Stallone, only called him Stallone. They line up around the block for Stallone. And this is a kind of movie they probably felt was going to do well overseas because it's in a tunnel. There are tunnels all over the place. It's only a specifically American story because it's set in New York City. And I have to say that as many big budget films of the 90s, the location work in the city, it makes you tear up a little bit if you were there at the time as I was. Now, I didn't see this film being shot. I mentioned how some of the Devil's Own, the movie, the Brad Pitt, Harrison Ford, during the Harrison Ford episode a few days ago when I discussed that, I didn't see that film being made. I didn't see Brad. I could make up a story because it's 27 years later. I did not see Brad, did not see Harrison Ford or Ruben Blades. I didn't see any of the principal cast. I just saw a bunch of trailers, and you see a trailer that says Mr. Pitt. Yeah, that could be a little misdirection. Who knows? But I don't have any memory of Daylight being filmed anywhere near Lower Manhattan. There are shots of Lower Manhattan, though. And there is a really amazing It's kind of a spoiler. But there's an amazing moment where there's a boat and you see the towers in the background. And it's just, it didn't mean anything at the time. Now it does. Any movie where you see the skyline as it was, even a film like New Jack City from the early 90s, that unbelievable cutaway helicopter shot showing Battery Park pulling away. Sorry. Get misty. Can't help it. But any movie set in the city that was produced at a time when I was there 5 or 6 days a week, it hits different. It means a little bit more. For somebody who is overseas and maybe has never been to New York and may never get there, it's a magical place. It's a fairy tale kind of a place, a little bit of a dirty fairy tale in spots. But when you're there, when you lived it, when you have real memories and that you help to create real history in that city, and you say, you see that building where this particular scene was shot? I used to work in that building, whatever the case might be. It just makes you feel tethered to the material. And because I spent so much of my life in the city right around the time that that movie was made, and many other films from that era, I'll always have a special place, and the film will always have a special place in my heart. But this movie didn't have to be made the way that it was. They didn't have to do the Irwin Allen disaster film angle. I feel like the film would have been better if they just hadn't done it the way that they did it. It's entertaining. I should say it's as entertaining as it is because of the supporting cast, because they got Stan Shaw, just celebrated a birthday. There's a terrific actor. Did never not give a solid performance. Even in a kind of throwaway movie, Snake Eyes with Nicolas Cage, Brian De Palma. Not worthy of anyone's talents. But Stan Shaw in that movie, as the heavyweight champ, he's really good. And Stan Shaw in this movie, he has a totally, completely thankless role. And as soon as you see him, spoiler alert, this guy's not making it to the end of the movie. He's probably going to die saving everyone's life temporarily. Bingo. It is a bit ridiculous to see a certain actor and immediately know, okay, he's not going to make it out of this alive. No chance. Stallone, yeah, he's probably going to make it out. Amy Brenneman, yeah. I thought Vigo was going to make it out. Oops. It's not easy to do those kinds of movies really well. And I've said that I don't consider Independence Day to be a guilty pleasure movie. I think Independence Day is a terrific film. It has elements of guilty pleasure movies, but there isn't much in Independence Day where I would say they made a mistake here and here and here and here. For what it tries to do, it hits all the numbers. Daylight is way more entertaining than it should be. And it's interesting, the other thing with the kind of disaster movie concept, in Independence Day they got away with it because the bad guys are the aliens. It's a disaster film in form, but we have an actual common enemy. And People magazine, when their lead critic reviewed Daylight, kind of liked it. Problem he had with it was there was no villain. And that's not to say that one of the characters trapped in the tunnel should have turned out to be the bad guy. But when you think of the career of Sylvester Stallone, he's at his best when he can focus his anger or his energy on an antagonistic character, even if it's just a character such as an Apollo Creed, who's not really a conventional antagonist. Clubber Lang, Ivan Drago, Mason Dixon, whoever it might be. In the world of Daylight, the enemy is the tunnel itself. The enemy is the fact that the tunnel is built over and around the Hudson River. Or as the critic for People magazine, I forgot the name, the only problem with this movie is there's no one for Sly to snarl at. There's no one for him to snarl at. But for what it tries to do, I've seen the film at least 6 or 7 times start to finish. It's always entertaining. And director, I think, was Rob Cohen, who later did a film I really like called Reign of Fire. See, I almost said Dragonheart, but that was a movie from the same year, 1996, with Dennis Quaid and the voice of Sean Connery. Pretty good. Some really good musical choices in that film. But Rob Cohen, I believe, is the director of Daylight, and he is very good at staging action sequences, especially using real, or I should say realistic lighting, because Daylight is a movie where there are some action sequences. Some people would say, well, they didn't light it enough. He was trying to make it seem like it was real. I appreciate that. It didn't feel like he was cheating. Well, we don't want the seams to show through, so we're going to do it in the dark. Like a few years later, the Masters of Disaster, Emmerich and Devlin in Godzilla, you never really get a good look at the monster or the Godzilla creature because all the scenes are at night. You can't see it, but it doesn't look as fake as it would if it was shown in close-up and we say, well, that really looks like a big piece of plastic and rubber with some fake teeth. But they kind of hid it. But in Daylight, the action sequences all work. And there's one unbelievable stunt where it looks like Stallone is risking life and limb, and I assume he didn't. But his character, it doesn't even make any sense that he does this. Again, guilty pleasure, stupidity, or as Roger Ebert would say, idiot plot syndrome. There is a lot of idiot plot here. So, people are trapped in the tunnel. Stallone figures out a way for him to get in. But then Amy Brenneman asks him, it's a great question. Do you have a way out? No. Well, what the fuck are you doing here? Hey, good question. But the scene in which Stallone manages to get into the area of the tunnel that he needs to, even though he has no idea how they're going to get out, it's almost like he's just going there so that he can die among other New Yorkers. Die a martyr? I don't know. But the scene that he goes through, it's some kind of like a wind tunnel, and he has to go through a fan that's going at a significant rate of speed at exactly the right instant. It really looks like Stallone is doing it himself. And I don't know how they filmed it and made it seem real, but it's the kind of shot that the director would have calculated. I can't use a stuntman. So whatever they figured out as far as hydraulics and doing slow motion and stop, whatever the fuck they did, it works. And it is, like I said, if I can't figure out how it's done, because I know they're not trying to kill Stallone in the movie, the real Stallone, not the character. If I can't figure out how it's done, I figure, you know what? That's pretty damn good. I don't know how they did it. Fantastic. Job well done. It isn't really the kind of like rah-rah movie. It's not a stand-up and cheer kind of film, as is Independence Day. Then again, neither is the Towering Inferno, really. The Towering Inferno, when you get to the end and the certain characters survive and certain don't, you feel more a sense of relief, and it's the same with Poseidon Adventure. And you could argue Emmerich and Devlin again, 2012, Day After Tomorrow. A lot of these movies, really, Independence Day is the only one where it's a stand and cheer. And Stallone almost seems to, sorry, this is a mild spoiler, he almost seems to poke fun at genre conventions, because there's a moment towards the end where it's supposed to be the rah-rah moment, and he makes almost an Arnold Schwarzenegger joke about, I think I got to go to the fucking hospital here. You know, we can't really celebrate. He'll pop open a couple of brewskis, yeah, from my hospital bed. Daylight. What a great title. Perfect title. And a great poster. Because the poster, it has what's supposed to be Stallone, at least the primary poster from when the movie was first coming out, and he's towards the back. It's not one of those with his face up front like so many of his other movies, the Rocky movies, the Rambo movies. He's pushed back, and what appears to be an explosion is behind him. That's a pretty good summary of the movie just in the poster. After you see, you know what, the poster is pretty fucking accurate. Well done. This was always going to be a one-off. This was not a movie that could have ever, like, how would they get stuck in another tunnel? But then again, after Escape Plan, I was like, well, they're not going to do that again. And then they did it twice more. Each one was worse than the previous one. But Daylight came out at a time. The Yanks had just won the World Series. I was a professional blackjack player. And I didn't know what I was going to do with myself 5 months later when I graduated NYU. This coursework was done. By the time this movie came out, December 6th, I'd already turned in all my papers. It was just a question of, well, what's his final cum going to be? Okay, 3.71 if you're curious. It did pretty well. Even though my last semester grades kind of suffered a little bit because I was doing so much other stuff. But in that instance, at least I was living, right? I was 22 and I was living. I never could have imagined myself as somebody who was commuting practically from the city to Atlantic City to play blackjack. It's a different side of life. I was a kid who always went to sleep early, woke up early, go to the gym. I was still going to the gym, but I wasn't sleeping as much. But I was absorbing new experiences. Went to the movies a lot, studying movies. Out of the previous 3 Stallone guilty pleasure movies, if I have to rank them, Over the Top is the worst of the 4. I see, Cobra's so problematic. The movie's so fucked up. It's such a terrible film. But at the same time, it's glorious. So I'm going to have to put Cobra ahead of Tango and Cash. Tango and Cash is the best movie of those 3, if we just kind of break it down into components. Sly and Kurt Russell had really good chemistry. You know, they worked well together. It's too bad they didn't do a sequel to that. But then again, it's too bad Stallone didn't do a sequel to Cobra. But if I have to class Daylight in relation to the others, you really can't. It's so different. Now, how do you really judge a disaster film against conventional narratives? It's very difficult. It's almost impossible. But all 4 movies, for better or worse, have high rewatchability factor. Every time there's a big arm wrestling match in Over the Top, you're glued to the screen. And every time Stallone and Kurt Russell start ragging on each other and ripping each other, and Jack Palan's chewing scenery in Tango and Cash, can't take your eyes off the screen there either. And Marion Cobretti is a riveting sort of a character. He's totally absurd. Let's take Dirty Harry and see if we can make him really dirty. But he'll be played by Stallone. That was kind of Stallone's idea. It wasn't by accident that he cast 2 main actors, Rennie Santoni and Andrew Robinson, 2 of the main actors, Harry's partner and the primary villain, in big roles in Cobra. That was not a coincidence. He was drawing attention to it. Hey, this is going to be my Dirty Harry. What do you think? It's not as good. But I love it anyway, and it will have a cult following, a hardcore following, who will talk up that movie at every opportunity, as I have, even while acknowledging its trash. I love it. Marion Cobretti, another incredible name, courtesy of Sylvester Stallone. Daylight, he plays Kit Latura. I don't know what his name is really supposed to be. Is Kit a nickname? Not sure. He's not as memorable a hero as any of the guys I just mentioned, whether Ray Tango, Lincoln Hawk from Over the Top, or Marion Cobretti. But Stallone at the center, knowing, in most of the scenes anyway, that he was getting ready to do some real acting as soon as he got the hell out of Italy. He was going to go back to New York, New Jersey, and start shooting Copland with some of his best friends and people in the industry who he considered major influences, even if they're in the same age bracket, such as Bobby D and Keitel, who he adored, and Ray Liotta, who he also adored. Kathy Moriarty, he had been a huge fan of just as a fellow performer. Peter Berg, a lot of people in that movie that Stallone had always wanted to work with and had the opportunity. Robert Patrick, who, was a T-1000 in Terminator 2, and Stallone was a big fan of him and that movie. In the multiverse Last Action Hero, it's Stallone who plays the Terminator. This time it's personal. That was you. You were in that movie. What do you mean? He's fantastic. It's his best performance ever. The 20th entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies, Sylvester Stallone's 1996 disaster flick, Daylight. It's not free on streaming anywhere that I can find, but if you've never seen it, dare I say, it's worth a couple of bucks. You just want to shut your brain off and watch shit get blown up real good for a couple of hours. Daylight. This has been episode 248 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday afternoon here with me in New York. If you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, or Podbean, or iHeartRadio, or Amazon Music, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode sooner than you think. Till then,